the overall output is still the same, but it just it allows higher market values more, so you can use that and you can use that to compare the local market value, or the overall production should be the same, right? In either case.
So if you discriminate, how much? Yeah, so that's right. But how do we see that? So if you discriminate, what's the production?
If he discriminates, then or he's producing at the price of 2/3. So
if he doesn't discriminate,
oh,
right? If he doesn't discriminate, he produces 1 unit.
Right.
And then if he discriminates, there's a price 1 there, right? So that's 1/2, and there's a price 1/2 there, so that's
Right.
1/2. So this is the same, right? Okay, but what about social surplus? Is it higher or lower?
So the social surplus is going to be 1 times half plus 1/2 times 1/2. So I'm assuming the social surplus should be less than 1.
So the social surplus in this case, right, it's a little triangle up there, right? So if the price here is 1, right, then there's a distance 1 here, right, and he produces 1/2 unit. So it's 1/2 of that triangle, 1/2 of that product, so it's 1/4. And then in the other market, how much is it? Well, it's going to be 1/2 times 1/2. And then you have to take 1/2 of that again, so that's going to be 1/8, right? So that's 3/16 in the case when he does discriminate. Now when he does discriminate, what is the analogous thing that we do?
So you use the derivative of 2 minus 3p over 2, and then you do it until the 2/3 value.
Yeah, so there's actually a bit of a kink.
Right.
So it's actually more useful if we use the 2 individual ones.
Right.
Glen,
Yeah.
is 1/4 plus 1/8 3/8?
Oh, 3/8, you're right. Okay, so then if we do the other one, it's 2/3, so there's a maximum price of 1 in one case, and there's a maximum price of 2 in the other case, right? So we have a distance 2 here, we have a distance, that's right, 2 minus 2/3, which is 4/3 here. And here we have 1/3. And then what's the quantity sold? Well, it's 2. Yeah, okay. So in the 4/3 case, the quantity sold is 2/3, and here it's going to be 1/3, right? And that means that this one's going to be 1/2 of 1/9, so 1 over 18, and this one's going to be 8 over 9. Half of that is 4/9, right? So that gives us a total of 8 plus 1 is 9, not 18, so that's 1/2. And 1/2 is clearly greater than 3/8, so we get that social surplus is higher without discrimination, right? Okay, so that was messy. But Sam, can you give us some intuition for why that's true? So the output stayed the same. Prices went up in the high market and down in the low market. Why might that reduce total surplus?
Because the low market doesn't value it as much.
Exactly. You could go on. That's exactly right.
Um,
So they're willing to pay less for those increased units in quantity, right? The people in the high market are willing to pay more. And so that means the markup of the people in the high market is by definition higher, otherwise it wouldn't be the high market. And so the deadweight loss is greater from decreasing the quantity there than it is the reduction from increasing the quantity in the low market, right? And so that means that if the quantities stay the same, then overall it's going to make the social surplus lower, right? Exactly right. Okay. Great. Okay, so what that shows us is that in this particular example, this is just one very specific example, output was unaffected, welfare went down, and consumer surplus went down. Because if welfare went down and the monopoly got more profit, which he has to because otherwise he wouldn't discriminate, then consumer surplus must have gone down, right? Now, obviously, this was a very special example because we made both demand curves linear, and we had some very specific things. But it turns out that these properties always hold whenever the two demand curves are linear. We always get this. And more broadly, if both markets are served, absent discrimination, then output can go up or down. In this case, nothing happened, but it could go up or it could go down. Now, what do I mean by the two markets being served? Well, imagine that no drugs were being sold in Africa because there was reimportation. If you ban reimportation, that can only make people better off, right? Because now you sell to the people in Africa, and it doesn't increase the price in the United States at all, so that's always better. But if both markets were being served in the absence of discrimination, then the discrimination can make output go up or it can make output go down. Yeah, Edward.
Sorry, this is a question about the previous slide.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure how you got the optimal price of 2/3. How do you do that?
It's always halfway up the demand curve. So here, what's the maximum price that anyone would be willing to pay? Well, it's the point where this thing is equal to 2. So 3 over 2 times P is equal to 2, right? And that means that P is equal to 4/3, and half of that is the optimal price. So on any linear demand curve, it's always halfway up the demand curve.
Or we can do PQ and differentiate.
Or you can do differentiate and solve that. Yeah. So welfare may also go either up or down. So in this case, it went down, but you can show that it can go either up or down. And consumer surplus even can go up or down. So what gives? Basically, everything ends up depending on pass-through rates, like we talked about in the last lecture. If the pass-through rate is higher in the low market than it is in the high market, then the impact on the low market will be bigger than the impact on the high market is, and so that will be beneficial. If the high market has a higher pass-through rate than the low market, then it's going to be worse. And the threshold in terms of the pass-through rate for the output effect is going to be lower than it is for the welfare effect because of what Sam said, right? That is, that if the output would have to expand by a lot more in the low market than the high market in order for it to be beneficial, because the low people value it less than the high people do. And the threshold is even higher when we think about consumer surplus, because the monopoly is increasing their profits, so the social surplus would have to increase by a lot in order for the consumer surplus to increase, right? So in principle, discrimination can be either good or bad. The only thing that's really consistent is that there's a redistribution from the high market to the low market. So the people in the high market are worse off, generally, and the people in the low market are better off. And this is a bit messy of a picture, but it's also a bit puzzling, because it's everything here seems like it is complex and it depends on the details, but what we know is that perfect price discrimination is always producing more, always more socially efficient, but it reduces consumer surplus. And it seems like we could get to perfect price discrimination by a series of third-degree price discriminations, right? You could break the market into 2 groups, then you could break each of those subgroups into 2 groups, and break each of those subgroups into 2 groups until you get to charging every individual person a different price, right? So it just doesn't seem like it should be the case that we get all these weird different results. And I think that this suggests, and this is something I'm actually sort of working on, that really all this analysis came out of a really weird way of splitting up a market demand curve. Because that linear demand curve we were talking about, as I emphasized, sort of had this kink. It sort of looked like that. So that's sort of a weird demand curve to have, right? You'd think that in general, usually we have like some nice smooth demand curve and we break it up into 2 other nice smooth demand curves, right? One way we could think about doing that is just saying that, imagine that we just split it in a very simple way. Everyone who's willing to pay above a certain amount of money is in one market. Everyone who's willing to pay below a certain amount of money is in another market. Then notice that if the place where we split it is below the price we're currently charging, right? Then we're just going to keep charging the same price in the market that's above that point, because those other people weren't being served at all, and it's just like the case where the market wasn't served and everything is better off, right? On the other hand, if the place where we split it is above the price we're currently charging, then we're going to raise the price in the high market to the minimum price where we split it, right? And that's not going to cause any distortion in the high market. And in the low market, we're going to lower the price, right? Because we've got less inframarginal units that we now need to keep the price high on. So if we split things in that sort of simple way, we always get the sort of results we'd expect. So I think that obviously that's one very specific way to split up demand curves as well, but it may be more common or closer to what usually happens than is just adding up 2 things like a linear demand curve and getting this kink. Okay, so on Tuesday we're going to talk a lot about redistributive taxation. But the basic goal of redistributive taxation is very similar to monopoly, which is you want to raise a bunch of revenue from rich people so that you can give it to poor people. But if you tax the rich a lot, and the basic idea is, you want to take from each person according to their ability, give to each person according to their need, right? But the problem is if you do that, you discourage people from looking like they're a talented person. You make them not work hard, right? And you could solve this problem, as we discussed in the lecture on competition, if you knew how much every person was capable of earning, rather than how much they actually ended up earning, right? And then you could just charge them however much they could earn, rather than how much they actually do earn. And this is basically the equivalent of perfect price discrimination. It's like going to each person and saying, oh, I know how much you're going to make. Give me that amount. And then we don't need to worry about all the inefficiency of taxing income. Now, absent this, we're going to have to use some form of price discrimination. So one thing we could do is second-degree price discrimination, which is basically what progressive taxation is. It's like, if you earn this much money, you pay this tax rate. If you earn more money, you pay this tax rate. And those adjust so as to discriminate in the right way, right? But another thing you could do is you could put people into categories based on things you think that indicate that they might have higher or lower wealth. And you charge higher taxes to people who are in categories based on just things you can observe about them that makes you think that they're going to have higher income. And this basically allows more redistribution without having to charge people for working harder, and therefore discouraging them from working. One very obvious category is height, because you can just really easily observe height. Another thing could be eye color, right? So it turns out that both of those things do a very good job of predicting people's income. So let me show you the height example. So this is the distribution. Here are mean hourly wages, and here by height. So short people are overwhelmingly down at the bottom part of this distribution. Medium height people are higher, and then the tall people are the highest.